Good morning from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. It's hot, it's sunny here, and welcome to another 10 by 10 series, this time on digital transformation. And I'm delighted to have with me Chris Bunio. Chris from Winnipeg in Canada. Good evening to you, Chris.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Chris, the 10 minutes goes very, very fast. So in the first minute, can you tell us a little bit about you and your company?
Absolutely, John. My name is Chris Bunio. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TheoryMesh, based in Winnipeg, Canada. We deliver software solutions for the food and agriculture supply chain. So we're effectively connecting data from the field and the farm all the way through to processing and into consumers, trying to make sure that that's traceable, auditable, and can apply machine learning to optimize processes.
Wonderful. Now, Chris, we're going to talk today about digital transformation in emerging economies, developing economies. I believe you have had a rich career all around the world with Microsoft. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences in deploying technologies in emerging economies?
Absolutely. I spent nearly 20 years with Microsoft, and the majority of that was spent in the Middle East and Africa region. So I had a range of projects undergoing across different types of technology. So I was fortunate enough to be able to work with governments all through that region, from South Africa to Egypt and into the Middle East. And some of the big things that I was always seeing was that the technology is there to solve a particular pain point or a particular problem. And sometimes as technology companies, we forget that. We forget that you actually have to provide value. So as we, from a Microsoft perspective, we're embarking on some of these digital transformation projects. The real goal was to actually improve something in that country, leave the country better than we got to it, and find a way to make sure that it was actually taking into account the context for the project, not just sort of bringing in the latest and greatest new technology. And that really did inform how you would approach projects, how you'd make sure stakeholders were engaged, and think about things like capacity development.
Gotcha. So you've taken your 20 years experience at Microsoft and deploying technology around the world, and now you're the co-founder and CEO of TheoryMesh. What lessons have you taken from your experiences that you're now going to apply with TheoryMesh? Because I believe you're also exploring the emerging markets.
Absolutely, absolutely. As we built our software platform for TheoryMesh, one of the things that I've always wanted to do was to design for global markets. So making sure that as we think about the technology, we're not designing it so that it requires infrastructure that is not going to be available in places like Africa. So thinking very much about how do you make sure that you can reach every country around the world and make sure you get to the last mile. And for that, we lean heavily on cloud services just because it's relatively straightforward to deploy into data centers around the world. But then we're thinking with our user connection, how do we do things like supporting text-based phone interfaces? So how do we think about the kind of basic technology that's available? And one of the big things that we found in the food industry is that the amount of paper that still gets passed through the food industry means that we try to handle paper as a first-class citizen within our platform. So we're looking at ways to make it easy to consume paper records, paper information, and lower that entry bar. So thinking about where does the information come from in emerging markets, it's going to be a lot of paper. It's going to be kind of limited function cell phones. And in some cases, there's no connectivity at all. So we have to think about the ways to support people using a system where connectivity may not be possible.
They're all very valid points, Chris, and thanks for bringing those up. So right down to simple phones, not smartphones, but simple phones with text-based messaging, paper, and the infrastructure may not be there. Can you talk a little bit about affordability? How do you price for developing markets when you have, if you go in with a solution, even if it's a mobile solution, and you're asking a farmer to pay something that takes away from their profit? What kind of opportunities and challenges are there in that area with regard to paying for the system?
Yeah, we have been exploring this quite heavily, and it's a challenge in developed markets as well as emerging markets. Obviously, more acute in emerging, but where we're focused today is really on kind of upstream of the farmer and making sure that we've got solutions that can track the data that adds more value to whatever product is being produced. So, for example, if you are, let's say, you're processing cocoa, in the chocolate supply chain. What we want to be able to do is connect the data that would come from the farm to that processing step. And then as that goes upstream to purchasers, there's an incentive all the way along that chain for people to be more transparent and have more information. And what we want to do is work with the companies who are kind of in that middle of the supply chain to create those incentives for farms to share that data. And generally what we're starting to see is that the incentive comes through higher price for a crop or other ways that we can provide value and monetization. That's one of the reasons why we like using blockchain, is because it does provide some infrastructure support to be able to do things like payments that can travel from further up the supply chain back to the start, if you can create NFTs and smart contracts from data on crop inputs. So we're exploring a number of different ways to make sure that that value kind of hits the whole supply chain, and then really targeting the supply chain as a whole entity to make sure that those farmers at the beginning aren't paying an outrageous price for sharing that data, but they're actually getting value. They're actually getting a higher price for their crop or some other incentive that makes it worthwhile for them to be doing that.
Wonderful. I'm a big fan of incentives, especially when they put more money into the hands of the primary producers, the farmers, the smallholders, and so on. So, Chris, I often talk to people about, my 6D model of digital transformation, but it starts off with digitize, moving from the paper to electronic forms. And they can be even simple electronic forms. And then you move into digitalization, which is the business process and role automation. And then the point you mentioned there around the incentives, the third D in my model is around disintermediation, or taking out the middleman. How do you see the technologies like blockchain, or do you see technologies like blockchain enabling the farmer to be able to go direct to markets and cutting out the middleman, hence getting more margin? Is that realistic?
I think it's going to be a challenge in a lot of markets for the short to medium term. I think what we're seeing and that will bleed over into emerging markets is the trend in developed markets for companies to do more direct sourcing, and doing that direct sourcing primarily around sustainability. So being able to get sustainability information that's trustable, traceable, auditable, that feeds in and then can supply further up the supply chain. So I think we're going to see more of that happen in emerging markets, and in some cases, and I go back to cocoa because it's such an interesting market to be working with. There are incentives for the big chocolate companies to be looking at improving economic benefits and sustainability in the markets where the cocoa is grown, and I think that's going to be a tool to help those markets really develop. And I see tools like blockchain helping to support that, because we can have validated permanent information on the ledger. And in some cases, we can actually attach payment information to that data. So you can think about a model where you create a smart contract that represents a crop, and there can be a crypto-based payment that's done against that smart contract when certain conditions are met. And that could be a way to flow from really the end of the supply chain all the way back to the primary producer. So I think we're going to see scenarios like that where blockchain becomes a very interesting part of how we create incentives for farmers to be doing and sharing more information.
Gotcha. Quite interesting, Chris. I scanned the QR code here in Saigon over the weekend, and it was on a chicken product. And it came back and showed me a picture of the farm, but unfortunately it wasn't a Vietnamese farm, it was a Canadian farm. So the actual asset, the digital asset that was assigned or put into the blockchain record was actually fake and false. So, we have to address that. Of course, it's only as good as the information that goes in. In other conversations we talked about here with markets, we talked about the risk that those intermediate traders or aggregators can buy products from other countries and put them into a blockchain and try to sell them as local products. So a lot of challenges for sure in the markets. Chris, in the last minute or so, and you can take your time with this, minute and a half, what kind of key guidance would you get? You have 20 years of experience with a wonderful company, Microsoft. You've done a lot of stuff all over the world. Now you're a CEO, and you're taking all that learning, that experiences, and you're applying it into the food sector. What guidance would you give to, let's say, food companies on the one hand, and on the other, to other people like you in approaching this?
Well, it's a big scope of a question, John. So I think for me, two of the biggest factors for success, and we're very heavily invested in this at TheoryMesh. One is understanding the market in as much detail as possible. So really understanding the processes, the data, the players, the flow of money, all those different pieces, and really taking time to understand that before rushing to a solution and thinking that something that works in one market is going to work in another. So really getting that kind of understanding is a critical success factor. And then I think surrounding that is going to be, for any of the companies in the sector, is skill development and making sure that as new technology comes out, as we see digital transformation happen, that we're thinking about people at the center of that. Because digital transformation, you can deploy technology anywhere, but if people are not ready or people are not equipped with the skills they need to be able to work with that technology, those projects fail. And that's a finding from many digital transformation projects all over the world. So I'd say those things are kind of critically important for any company that's looking to get into the emerging markets to sort of expand there. And at TheoryMesh, we're definitely thinking about that pretty much every day as we build out our product set and look at our next markets to go after and how we help to build skills where we're moving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Chris. And I think, we need to see digital transformation as not a destination, but a journey that organizations go on within their broader ecosystems. Folks, there you go. There you have it. Chris Bunio from TheoryMesh in Winnipeg in Canada. If you want to contact Chris, his contact details will be underneath the video. Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to talk with me today.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure.
All the best.